warm welcome to Michael and Ivanka's Grand Podcast, a weekly podcast where we figure out what we think about everything. My name's Michael Forrest.
And I'm Ivanka Majic.
And this week we're talking about politics at work. Just talking about politics at work in the wake of the sort of Basecamp scandal.
It's been a very politics at work kind of a week, I think. So yes, why not, eh?
Yeah. So David Hennemeyer Hansen and Jason Fried said, "Well, we've decided we're not going to talk about politics at work anymore." And we thought, it's a bit of white privilege there, isn't it?
We did. A little bit. Various kinds of privilege, but yes.
Yes, and there's been some stuff. Yeah, there's been some stuff on Twitter. But yeah, we'll sort of. I was going to bring in some other stuff that I've looked at, and just generally, our experiences of being at work and whether or not it's an inclusive environment and how important that is and what can be done and does it, all that kind of thing. So there's an intro. Let's just sort of swell up into the music, shall we?
Better than you.
I think I handled that pretty smoothly, given the state of me.
Yeah, Michael's had his vaccine.
That's my news. I got vaccinated yesterday, and it got to sort of it was at 11, and I was sort of like nervous, sitting waiting, and then it just it's just a prick. You just don't even. I was like, oh yeah, because spies go around like injecting people without them noticing all the time, don't they?
Like all the time.
So it was just in and out. I was like, okay, that's done. And then I was sort of like, I cycled home from Marble Arch, which is like a 15-minute bike ride. I was like, does my arm feel weird? Does something feel weird? And I kept having these like little, is this weird? Does my hand feel weird? But then it was like, well, it's my other arm. And then I'm always aching a bit because of my very energetic workout regime. But yeah, it was sort of got through. The day went on. I was like, I think I've dodged it. And then it got to like 8 o'clock, and suddenly I was a shivering, chattering mess. Sharon was like, "Do you want a blanket?" I'm like, "Yes." "Do you want a hot water bottle?" "Yes." And I'm like, "I'll go and do it." I can't do it. And then like we're like in bed, and she's like, I was like, my feet are so cold, and I had the sort of hot water bottle by my feet, and I was like, my feet are so cold. She was like, you could try wearing socks. I was like, yeah, socks, that probably work really well. I thought, get right on that. And she was like, do you want me to get some socks for you? Put the socks on. I was like, yes. So Sharon put some socks on me.
Oh.
And so basically, like, yeah, I had a bit of a night. So woke up at 3 a.m. kind of with a headache, not sort of feverish anymore, which was nice, but then just a bit of a headache, had some paracetamol. This morning woke up feeling like actually physically okay, but freaking exhausted. So I'm pretty like low energy today, unfortunately. So if this podcast episode if I'm not bringing my A game, that's why. But yeah. But it's cool. I've got my little sticker. I'm vaccinated. Well, it's the and I feel very proud of myself for taking that bullet and having the AstraZeneca, making those sacrifices so that other people can have the nice vaccines. I'll have the horrible one. But yeah, it was all a well-oiled machine. That NHS.
Very good.
The centre. But yeah. Sorry,
that's
my vaccine news. But back to you. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm jealous that you've had a vaccine. I phoned up on Monday and said, any news on the vaccines? Any? The nurse of our GP surgery. Okay. Hello, it's me. And she went, no, we're still vaccinating people that were born in the 1950s, and I, for the record, was born in the 70s, so they're a bit of a way off. And she said they said they keep telling us they're going to get loads of vaccines, and this week she said they've sent me 1 bottle of Pfizer, which is 7 doses. So I know it's an island and there's not that many people, but there are more than 7. And what's slightly frustrating about it is that they've put out this tourism strategy recently. I saw on the news here about COVID safe islands. So, come on holiday to Croatia. There's no COVID on the islands. That would be strategy would be supported, I think, with a vaccine strategy, which seems to be not forthcoming. So I'm jealous of your vaccination status. Unlike you, I've had 75 cups of coffee already this morning. I've been up for a while. I've been productive. I've been doing everything. I've had no COVID exposure. My immune system is only processing whatever normal stuff, normal germs, and no new ones, to my knowledge. But I will tell you about my week. My week has been. The other reason I'm feeling quite good is that I had a little. I've sorted out some things at work. That's good. And also, I had all these things mooching around in my head, and then I wrote a tiny little blog post, 3-minute read, made me feel much better. Put it on the Twitters. Some people engaged. It was nice. And then it's not necessarily a nice podcast. Nice blog post because it's called "Everything Is Not Okay," but to set the scene. But made me feel better, and that's the news. That's the news from Ivanka.
That's the news of Ivanka. That's okay. I guess we can have a I guess we've done my news. Let's press this.
I'm a little peanut. I'm a little peanut. I'm a little peanut.
That was the Peanut song and me riding a bike. Right, so politics at work. What a bummer when people start talking politics at work, eh?
Where are you? Sorry, I know. It is a controversial subject. Very controversial. People talking about the things that affect their lives at work. It's just wrong.
Yeah, how dare they?
How dare they? How
Make
dare
us feel
they?
uncomfortable.
Yeah, because it's just not acceptable.
Perspective. The best way to have a nice, relaxed atmosphere at work is to have everybody be basically the same. And you don't have to worry about any of that nonsense.
Yeah, none of those feelings, they don't come into it. None of those sort of discomfort. No, we don't need any of that. So yeah, it's not. It wasn't. They didn't really cover themselves in glory this week, did they?
Yeah, the Basecamp. So the Basecamp people. So it's interesting for me because I've been a sort of fan of David Heinemeier Hansson for decades. Maybe not decades, but certainly since the mid-2000s. He's the guy that made Ruby on Rails. He's the guy that sort of set the state of a lot of the better technology, and a lot of stuff is built on that or similar technologies, a lot of web stuff. And it's that he got me, that's why I got a Mac, was after seeing how it could be. It didn't have to be horrible. And so I've always had, and I saw him talk at a conference, and it was just it was nice. But you sort of you see stuff like this and you think, oh no. I don't think we're cancelling him, but we're certainly saying, look. I think the best summary of it was employees saying at this company. So basically, the employees had this. Yeah, there was this public announcement that said we're not going to talk. We're going to ban politics discussions at work. And your first reaction is okay, I guess, well, maybe it was getting really messy and lots of time was being wasted on stuff because people just disagree in it. But my first thing, he was like, oh, there's, we don't want to waste time on these irreconcilable differences between people. And I thought, that's a bit of a defeatist attitude, isn't it?
Yeah. It was basically there's a lot of wrong in the world. And it makes everyone upset to think about it and talk about it. And there's it was almost like there's no right or wrong, so everyone's entitled to it, and all of that sort of razzmatazz. And yeah, it just felt like I don't want to talk about it.
Yeah, and I feel like the sort of divisive approach to politics is something that is very much being fueled from one end of it. I mean, yes, okay, there's cancel and then left splintering and blah blah blah, but there's a fundamental sort of commitment to diversity and inclusion and thinking of as many perspectives as possible, which is not comparable to we want things to stay the same as they are, and we'd rather not talk about stuff that makes us uncomfortable, which is kind of how DHH's thing came across. Like
it did, yeah.
And you see sort of staff saying, like, there's this sort of unspoken thing, there's this sort of running joke that basically the company exists for the enjoyment of these two founders, which I can see, because they've done a lot of stuff. They're always writing about like the 4-hour work week or the 30. All these sort of like work should be fun, programming should be fun, blah blah blah. I think they're very much, they sort of want to enjoy themselves at work, but like privilege, right?
Yeah.
That's nice if you can do it, but if there's some people in your workplace that are uncomfortable with some behaviours, then you can't just brush it under the rug because it makes you uncomfortable.
No. And I think, I accept that it's difficult at the moment there are some most topics are really heavy at the moment. But they always have been, I think. They're just, in a weird way, I think they're affecting more people. Things like the pandemic, things like that. Like, you can't really, it's not, it will affect you. You will see it. It is in your face. We've had the George Floyd, the Derek Chauvin trial, which was, that's groundbreaking, historical. Yeah. But, at the same time in the news, there's still police killings in America. Like, they're not gone away. One person has been convicted. Brilliant. There's it's barely scratched the surface, frankly, of the depth of brokenness.
Did you see the one with police give man a lift home and then end up shooting him?
No, I didn't.
Ride home and then somehow ended up shooting him. I saw that headline and said, "What are you doing, America?"
Well, there's been it's like there's just and the thing. I genuinely don't know how we can learn, any of us, if we don't talk.
Yeah, and so either you got to have a podcast where you go, "Oh God, we're gonna talk." Okay, fine, we'll talk about politics. Because, like, if you don't have to, you don't want to, really. You only talk about politics because you have to, right? Because it's the only way to protect yourself, to sort of, like, make people, like, develop some empathy for your position and realise that maybe you don't see things in the same way as them.
Yeah.
And, if you can't just stick your fingers in your ears.
Well, I personally am I am the kind of person that talks about politics just for fun, because I'm I'm quite happy. I don't mind the uncomfortableness, I think, is the point. Like, to me, that's like a fun, lively conversation. I find it, though, very difficult. Like, if it's in-law people that, like, you have to find ways of getting on with, and you have to find out. And work colleagues, it is tricky with work colleagues because you do have to work with people. You can't just like stop returning their phone calls because you've got some massive values mismatch. And I have to confess that in my younger years, I have phased people out once I realised that our values are totally misaligned. Yeah. I've got, at least 2 examples, but I don't really, in retrospect, older me is a bit annoyed with younger me for not being a bit more forthright and just going, I'm sorry, what? Because they've gone off, like, I've left them with no idea about why I sort of gently stop talking to them, which I don't think is very grown up, really, or useful.
How many people have the bravery to confront a conflict head on? I don't know that that's a grown up, not grown up thing. I think that's takes a certain amount of I don't know. Is it maturity or is it just a special skill that not many people have? Because like, I'll kind of tell people, but then if they don't listen to me, I'm like,
Yeah,
Fine.
but you did tell him.
At least I told him, I suppose.
I think, and I think that's the like you can't mend things, you can't make things, but you can't highlight the fact. Let's take, for example, that writing a list of people's funny names, quote unquote, is wrong unless you discuss said list and go, now, do you remember when you were little and your mummy told you not to make fun of people? That's this, at the very least.
So to sort of provide some context on, like that's so the next layer of this whole Basecamp thing was that like some specifics about what had actually been going on, that turned out like they used to have this list of funny names that they kept and laughed at the funny names, and this sort of eventually they started to feel a bit less cool with that as the company grew, but like this list was still being maintained by this team or someone in this team, and it was like in this sort of public, company-wide forum, whatever thing. And then I think it sounded like it's sort of the discussion of it got quite heated, and when one guy was like this, started comparing this sort of thing to really sort of authoritarian, like sort of making some big comparisons about, and then David Hennemeyer Hansen sort of tries to like de-escalate it, and then just that no one's having it, basically. So I think he was just like, oh, that's fine, but let's just make it, everybody's nice, let's just keep going forwards and let's just move past it. But everyone's still like, no, we do not feel like this has been addressed, we do not feel heard. And so he just sort of ended up taking this sort of like hard line stance, but kind of dressing it up in some sort of bullshitty stuff as well. And they're very public. Like, he's written blog posts about all of this and sort of referenced this Verge article, with what came out, and said, okay, well, now this stuff is public knowledge, I'll talk about this and that. But there's a very sort of a clear sort of desire to like
stop talking about
stop, just sort of like go, okay, we've been heard, we've talked about it, and now it's over. Whereas a lot of people feel like, well, no, because we haven't addressed this properly yet.
No, I think that just demonstrates that he hasn't heard.
Well.
It's like that he hasn't, because if you don't understand that you've upset somebody, or how much you've upset them, or how wrong you think it is, it's like I've only really, the reason we record this podcast because it sets time aside in the week to actually think about something, and I hadn't up until now. This is the first time I've really, thought about the fact that I'm called Ivanka Majic. It's like I've been in the pub before with a dartboard in a where you write on the blackboard your name because you want to not darts, you want to play pool next, so you put your name on the list. I've been in the pub where somebody's joined up, and I deliberately always put a top and a bottom on the capital I on my name, because I used to just do a line and then people would join it up with a V, and so it would say Wanker instead of Ivanka, and then we'd all laugh. It's very funny because it was in the pub.
I'm trying that,
but
it's easy.
It's dead easy.
It's a fun one.
It's a fun one, and that's all kind of like, from. But can you imagine, in a sort of, and even then I'd go, cheers, mate, and be sarky and have a little, whatever. But in a professional environment, mocking. Imagine how mortified you would be to know that it's not politically correct. It's just rude.
It's just rude. It's like I think a good rule of thumb is if someone that you're having a joke about, how would you feel if they
knew?
Think about that reaction. So this is kind of how I think, like with the podcast, like sometimes we've back when it was edited, we might talk about someone and like we might like have a laugh at someone's expense maybe, but then I've always sort of, it's come to editing time and I've gone, okay, no, I don't want this to be out there. Probably they'll never hear it in a million years, but I don't think it's right that it's. No. I don't think it's right that it's out there. So, like, you really need to say, look, if this person came through, like, would you do that? Would you still say that if there was someone? Would you do? There's that Father Ted thing. I don't know. Like, would you do this if you're doing this in secret, so you're doing something wrong, right? That's it, right? Like, if you're doing something that you don't want someone else to know, then you're in the wrong. So, maybe that's a sign. But speaking of funny names, I did have a thought. This, and I'll do a break and then we'll come back. But speaking of funny names, I am enjoying the Dominic Cummings, Boris Johnson stuff. It's like it's very cathartic to sort of sit and eat popcorn and watch them try and destroy each other. But I was just thinking, like, do you think? I mean, I don't know if I presume he went to public school. Dominic Cummings, what a surname! That's got to be part of why he wants to see the world burn. I can't have given him an easy ride on that surname.
No.
Oh no, there's some Cummings all over this. Dominic, hey Tommy, what have you been doing? You could just see it. Like, how much of all this, how much of Brexit was fueled by this
schoolyard bullying. Schoolyard bullying.
I think it explains a lot.
Hello.
I'm messing. I was like, right, Ivanka, get ready. After this, I'm going to count you in, and then you're going to come in with a perfectly formed sentence. And she went, "No, I'm just going to panic."
No. The next place this leads us to is the which we have talked about.
Yeah.
What happens when you stop people talking about things?
Yeah.
What happens? Like, people talking to each other is a way to learn, pass information around, including things like equality of pay. We've talked about this on the whole, repeatedly about the fact that women are underpaid. A lot of that is affected by the fact that we are discouraged from talking to each other about money. Yeah. We are discouraged from talking to our male colleagues. There's an example of a woman managing to, with the help of a union, take on Google, who tried to stop people talking to each other. There are about money, about their actual wages. There's Amazon's a really good example at the moment of trying to stop people talking about their working conditions, and they've had this whole thing about a vote on whether or not to unionize, and they did vote against unionizing. But Amazon employed some quite dirty tactics to stop people even addressing the subject of whether or not to unionize. So there's an interesting New York Times podcast that covers it in a bit more detail, which I thought was worth listening to. But it's like, how are people to know that what's happening to them isn't right unless they talk about it? Or how are they to know that what they're doing is wrong unless they talk about it? Or how you can't and you cannot dictate to people. I believe you cannot dictate to people what they're allowed to talk about and not. That's it.
You can try, but it's not going to work. They're going to find a way to talk about it.
They will, and they'll just like on the internet.
And there's quite a lot of ways to talk about things. And I guess the DHH, they were like, oh well, there's lots of other channels to talk about it. We just don't want it on the works. It's like, come on. And it's just. I mean, this not talking about it is just. That's only okay if that's only people that are happy with the status quo don't want you to talk about it in case it changes. So Amazon, Google, they're happy with how things are, so they want to sort of stop anything that changes that status quo because they're doing very well, thank you. And I think this idea, like some of the comeback on Basecamp was like, I think they softened it a bit and said, oh well, there'll be some places like you should talk about politics in the talk about politics place. It's like, but that implies that politics sits in parallel to our lives. Yeah, exactly. Like it's
like
siloed subject. No, it's like anything.
It's everything. It's whether important. It's the fact that I haven't had a vaccine and you have. That's politics. It's like I demand, but it's that or every single thing everything is politics, which is a point we've made before. But trying to, and I think there's a lot of this. historically a way to control people. It was easier to control people. Like, a coal mine in, I don't know, Derbyshire will have had no ideas of what the working conditions were in a coal mine in France. Yeah. They weren't able to compare notes. It would have been very difficult to get to that information. It would have been very difficult. Oh, what? So you get helmets? We don't get helmets. Like, do you know what I mean? I don't know what their topic might have been. But, if you think it would have been really hard to exchange that information. But these days, it is much less hard. And especially when it comes to tech companies. Oh, yes, come on. Definitely. It's like, how the internet works. You may have heard of it. You make a living off of it. Let's not try and pretend that we can control what information gets out.
Even just labelling something as political is a sort of is questionable, isn't it?
It is. Okay, yes.
Who decides whether this is a political conversation?
Really,
you're not like. It's a euphemism for things that make you unhappy. Like it's not there isn't some clear definition of workplace politics.
No.
That's something that's come out in these discussions. It's like, well, how do you decide who's the judge of it? And ultimately it comes down to, well, it's making me feel a bit uncomfortable, so
yeah. And it's making me feel a bit uncomfortable. It's kind of really the only. It's good that it's making you feel uncomfortable. Let's do so. If it's not making you feel uncomfortable, probably not make any progress.
Yeah, change doesn't happen without a bit of discomfort, and so there's just anything that might result in a change is political. Then, well, okay, so why does it need to change? For this reason and that reason.
And also, it probably also means that you're not actually a baddie. Like if you recognise that it's wrong and that's why it's making you feel uncomfortable. So my daughter does this when we're sort of like, we need to talk about that thing that you just did. Oh, should we not talk about? Let's leave it for now. Let's not talk about that. Let's talk about something else. Hey, look at it. She said the other day, she goes, when people are really cross with me, I say something funny and then it's all better. It's like, I was like,
just drawn back the curtain.
It's like, it's like distraction and diversion is a tactic,
sounds
but
like
not when you actually try to make the world better.
Sounds like a burgeoning Boris Johnson. When people are cross with me, I just say something foppish and everybody forgives me.
Which I think is a perfectly reasonable technique to explore when you're 6. And we discussed that with her. It's like, that is one way of getting people to not talk about it. But sometimes you have to take responsibility for what you just did.
I mean, sometimes you need to be preaching a bit more eternal hellfire for dishonesty. Just to, otherwise it just turns into this libertarian, laissez-faire, just see what you can get away with thing.
True.
So watch out for that. You need there to be some sort of divine punishment. Or she's just going to, go off the rails.
She's just going to go off the rails.
Who knows what's going to happen.
So it's like a very, I totally have sympathy with the lack of desire to talk about things that make you uncomfortable or make you feel angry. It's like, we're having this lovely Sunday lunch round a friend's house. Why would we spoil it by talking about the climate catastrophe? It's like, I don't always talk about climate catastrophe at Sunday lunch. You can invite me over safely and I will inject some humour, but if you ask me, I'm going to talk about it.
Some people have a habit, like okay, we're supposed to be having a nice time. Let's maybe not launch into a conversation about everything that's wrong with the world. But often, what happens at those things is someone will bait you with some throwaway comment that they know that you're that's going to wind you up, and then you sort of feel like, okay, I guess we're talking about that now. And that's the worst. It's like with relatives, it's like, why do you have to always make it this way?
I think it's, I mean, I do have a bit of a, do you want what I really think? Or do you want to smooth over this? Or if I've just got to know somebody or getting to know somebody, it's like, I do have quite strong opinions on this. Do you sure you want to go there? But I think, it's like but then it helps rattle out who you actually want to be friends with, I find. To me, it's like, oh, right, okay. And sometimes you explode something. And well, last weekend, I went for a beach clean, an organised beach clean with my little girl. Picked up some rubbish, went to a neighbouring biggish town, and did a beach clean, and it was for just an hour, and then we went off, had an ice cream and made it into a nice day out. And then somebody here in this village was talking about whether we should do one here, because I deliberately put it on Facebook. And then, and I was like, yeah, sure, if I'm happy to join in. And then they went, oh, I talked to somebody else, and they said, well, the council picks up the rubbish on the beach, so what's the point? I was like, well, the point is, and then you're like, and this is a WhatsApp chat, and you're like, first response is like, then you've got to try and work out a response that's going to lead to some sort of next bit of the conversation. I was like, well, I think there's enough rubbish to go around. She was like, that's how I feel. But I fear that everyone's going to laugh at us. And I was like, that, I'm afraid, is not a reason to not do something. Or, I don't know.
It's the real reason
that's
anyway, isn't it?
Not really. I think it's... So, yeah, I think the trying to control what people talk about is a slippery slope.
Slippery slope. So this week I was watching this 4-hour oral history of PopCap games on YouTube. So it's just sort of interviews with all the people from this company that was very successful. They made Bejeweled, they made Peggle, they made like all these games that went...
Even I've played Bejeweled.
Everyone was playing,
even
basically.
Me.
It's sort of like fun listening to them talking about it, because they were like self-funded, and this it was weird because like they were just suddenly making millions of dollars kind of thing, and they just didn't really, they peaked really early, so they just had this sort of games company that was like, yeah, just like take your time, do some prototypes, make some stuff, try and make it fun. There's lots of people, so but what it was a lot of sort of 20-something men, sort of like possibly just sort of like having a good time at work. But they sort of started talking about this. They had some system in the office where people would sort of share ideas and things, but it turned into a bit of a like raunchy, edgy kind of like place where all these young boys would be saying all this stuff. And as they sort of grew a little bit, and they sort of started to have women employees, they were talking to this one woman who's like basically said like, yeah, like these it was a bit much, and I was like basically ready to go. And so this woman's talking, yeah, she's like just ready to leave because the culture was a bit toxic for her. But then what they did when she sort of said she wanted to leave, they said, well, no, we don't want it to be broken, so can you be in charge of making it like inclusive? Can you be in charge of all that and sort of make it a nice environment and making it an inclusive environment? So she was like, yeah, okay, I like being in charge of things. And so she stayed, and she sort of helped work with them to make it a less she was the pearl, right, of the office kind of thing. She was the first one that was different to the other ones, and then it sort of turned into and even she put it sort of did remind me of that Pixar, is it Pixar, that little animation? Did you remember the ball of yarn? And she goes into this sort of masculine work environment, and everyone's making sort of sexist jokes, and she comes in, and then they sort of, there's the sort of transformation of the office afterwards, and you sort of see everyone being a bit more like free, and the guy that was making the sexist jokes is now wearing this like pink shirt, and it was like, you sort of like, when it's a more inclusive place, not everyone has to sort of bro up to go to work, and people are just happier in general. And I think she sort of like implied a little bit of that as well. But yeah, they were also talking about how they like really deleted all this stuff off this whole system just in case it ever came out, because they just didn't want to have to deal with the consequences of it. I hadn't known that story, and I think it's like I've worked in a couple of places that have those kind of like back channely, and at least one place I know there was a
it didn't. I think it did go very close to the mark, but it never particularly bothered me, so I never did anything about it. But a Jehovah's Witness worked with us, and he very bravely, I think, emailed the actual list and went, look, all of this stuff's making me really uncomfortable. And it started a conversation. I'm not sure, but I think he just chose to leave the list. This is like naughties.com sort of blah, nobody can. Well, it was the end of the 90s, so we all died. The company died anyway before it needed to be mended. But then somewhere else I worked, it had a terrible online culture for, the whole culture was to like have a pop at, like outsmart. It was like this weird sort of when you said bro up, it reminded me. It was like everything you did or everything you posted was up for an attack. And I stayed there, I think, about 7 months, and I just resigned. I went and found I was like, I can't work like this. And as I left, the guy, the owner said, I realise now we've made a mistake. And I was like, you can't, no, like you're not, I don't want to work here. I'm not the only, there's going to be other people that can't handle this culture, but I certainly didn't stay to fix it. I just left. It's like
fair enough, why bother? Like, it's hard to change an institution.
Yeah.
Like, it takes a lot, but it takes them to want to change. And so maybe like your leaving was, help them kind of realise.
I don't know that they had an influx of balanced. I don't think they suddenly became an inclusive workplace. In fact, I think they disappeared. But I think that's the thing about those cultures where you get this sort of nobody pulls you up on bad behaviour. Yeah. It's sort of, I think that bad behaviour that sort of like spills into other things. It spills into interactions. If you're speaking to a client who's got a funny name and you know that name is going to end up on the funny names list, I don't know how you're going to possibly be having a properly respectful conversation with that person.
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah.
It's just wrong, isn't it?
Yeah. And I suppose, yeah. So the reason that it's nice to just be, you start with a small company. It's just you and a couple of mates, and you know each other really well, and you make your edgy jokes, and it can creep up on you, I guess. It grows and grows, and then suddenly, like, you're making your edgy jokes, and there's a lot more people around, and suddenly there's like people that maybe don't like it, and you have the choice. Do you sort of but you then have to lose that thing that you quite like doing. But and realise probably that you have to feel guilty about it as well, as it's sort of seen in a wider context. And so some people will resist that pretty hard. But the reason you grow, the reason you hire more people from more diverse backgrounds is because it makes you stronger as an organism. Reproduction works by mixing diverse genes in order to make stronger children, and the sort of best performing kids seem to be the mixed race kids. It turns out, it's like you have to bring in, diversity is strength, and if you have a culture that is incompatible with diversity, then you're probably not going to survive all that much longer.
Yeah.
The symptom of that, how that happens, is people have had enough. They leave, or they shout at you, or they talk about politics at work, and you have to either say, okay, well, we're going to sort of limit ourselves to this sort of very specific but essentially vulnerable company, or we're going to embrace that and try and get better and learn how to do better at including more different viewpoints. That's it.
I think that if handled well, ultimately, this could do them a lot of good. If they actually learn, and actually accept and say and take responsibility and go, and then because who knows how many employees they've lost over the years that were good, or how many people didn't join because they thought, because that bad behaviour was coming out in a not necessarily the way they thought it was.
Yeah. I didn't realise that people were getting hurt by it. And the fact is, like, these are very smart people. And you hope that they'll sort of realise. And the trouble is with being smart, sometimes it helps you defend like you have emotions about. I always sort of talk about this in terms of like drug dependency or whatever. It's like almost like the smarter you are is like the better you are at justifying your emotional need for something. Like you just come up with more cleverer explanations of why you really have to have a cigarette, like right now. Yeah. Like it just hijacks your intelligence, and obviously like these founders have become uncomfortable in the workplace, and they've sort of brought their full intelligence to bear and their authority within the company to try and like justify their emotional response to it. But the next level of that is realizing that you're being controlled by some emotions that maybe you can look at it differently and grow and do better.
You can actually be cleverer than those feels. Letting those emotions tell you how to think.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I
think it's.
So let's hope that they make some
sort it
out.
And hopefully it sparks some conversations elsewhere as well. Hopefully. It's good that these things are out in the world.
Yeah.
Should
we
wrap it up?
Then? 40 minutes. Let's do it. There we go. Imagine that. Got through it.
You did. Well done, Michael. Well done. You reminded me. I introduced the podcast to a new friend of mine, a new friend that I found, and she said that it was like she felt like she was eavesdropping on us having a conversation. She quite enjoyed it. So that's good.
It's just the sign that we're not, trying to perform. We are performing a bit.
We are.
Try and make it a little bit.
I'm trying my best. It doesn't come naturally. Yeah, go on.
So if you like the podcast, why don't you go to grandpodcast.com, make sure you're subscribed. If you really like the podcast, you could be a Patreon supporter. What do you get? If you support us on Patreon, you get early access, many days early to full video episodes. You get access to our private Slack where we say all sorts of terrible things and you'll be privy to them. No, we don't. No. It's I mean, it's hard to be inclusive when there's not many people in there, but we haven't got anything there that we would not want out there. And I'm going to send you a mug as well. Very nice Grand Podcast mug.
Very nice it is.
Now. So where can people find you on the internet?
People can find me at Ivanka on Twitter. It's the best place.
Cool. And you can find me at Michael Forrest on Twitter and in various other places. This was broadcast live on my Twitch, twitch.tv/Michael Forrest, where I do some other things. I'm doing programming. I'm doing live music compositions, if you can imagine. Talk about putting yourself on the spot. I'm writing a song on stream at the moment called Life is Full of Pain and Disappointment, which is turning out to be
sounds really uplifting.
Anthem. It's good.
Is it?
But thanks for listening, and we'll hopefully see you next week. So have a good one. Bye.
Bye.